Nearly a quarter century ago, in the year 2000, the Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI, was launched. If you're a food business, you've likely heard of GFSI, but you may not know much about it, how to be certified to its standards, or even why you should care. So that's exactly what we'll be discussing in this episode of Tag Talks Food Safety. I'm Lisa Lupo, host of Tag Talks Food Safety, and today I'm welcoming TAG's Senior Manager of Food Safety, Kate McInnes, who's quite the expert in all things GFSI. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Lisa.
So to start us out, I wanted to give a bit more background on GFSI. It was launched to establish a global standard for food safety management systems. GFSI is not itself a certifying body, but it recognizes certification programs that meet specific benchmarking requirements, such as BRC, SQF, FSSC 22000. So while certification to a GFSI standard is not required by regulation, it is often required by downstream processors and retailers, and the process can be complex and resource intensive. So let's start with that, Kate. Given the intensity of certification, what's the value of being certified to a GFSI standard?
Yeah, there are several different benefits to being GFSI certified. So, like you mentioned previously, GFSI was developed as a global standard, and this is really important to the industry as regulatory requirements can fluctuate greatly and they do vary country to country. And so the GFSI benchmarking scheme creates an independent framework for meeting industry best practices when it comes to food safety, independent of region-specific regulation. And so GFSI is also required by many companies, both food manufacturers and retailers, as a requirement to purchase or sell products. And so it can certainly expand opportunities for businesses when they are certified.
Okay, so there's some options there. And once a facility decides to become certified, though, they need to understand what the different standard options are and which they want to be certified to, right? So we did discuss this a bit in a previous podcast that was called What GFSI Standard is Best for Your Business. So we briefly discussed some of the factors a facility should consider, but we want to go into a bit more depth now. So what, Kate, are some of the key differences between the standards that we had mentioned?
Yeah, so the GFSI standards are generally based off of good manufacturing practices and prerequisite programs. And these are built right into the clauses that exist within each standard. But in my opinion, the biggest difference between the standards is related to the development and implementation of these different programs. So some standards, such as BRC, are very structured, detailed, and heavily risk-based, whereas other standards, such as FSSC 22000, are more open to interpretation, providing that the programs are implemented on site. So each standard has their own unique sort of requirements, or I'm going to call them isms. And for an example, SQF ism would be the requirement of a detailed risk assessment about overhead piping in the production facility. And a BRC ism would be the implementation of a PEN policy as part of foreign material control. An FSSC ism is the requirement for SWOT analysis undertaken by the facility. So these isms, again, are different across the standards and important to understand. And these are certainly some of the factors that can make each standard different.
Okay, yeah, I really like that word ism. It's a great way to really detail that there's differences between the standards and they kind of each have their own specifications. So if I'm trying to pick my standard again, are there any further resources available to help me ensure that I understand what the different programs are well enough to make that decision?
Absolutely. So each website has a standard, or each website for the standard has a dedicated section to sort of read through that says, like, why is this standard the one that you want to pick? Why should you pick us? So I would certainly take the time to read through these and see which standard you think aligns best with the needs of your company. Another thing to consider is that there are a number of different resources that each standard has available to help with implementation. So a standard like BRC has an interpretation guide that goes along with the standard, and it goes through the standard clause by clause and explains exactly what the expectations are for implementation and what the auditors will be looking for in terms of compliance. So I personally have always found this extremely helpful. I would work just from the interpretation guide when preparing for certification or when questions came up around implementation.
Okay.
SQF and FSSC have similar resources available. They both have a variety of guidance documents and sort of tip sheets that are available on their websites that can help around how to implement various clauses and sections. So a full understanding of the resources that are available from each standard can certainly make the GFSI journey much easier for a company that's just starting out.
Okay. So yeah, if I go on and I kind of look at all the different resources on each of their websites and what they have to offer, and then I pick a program. But once I think that I have one, can I change to a different program? I mean, I'm sure it's better to do that before I get too far down the path, but why might I find that something, one is better than another?
Yeah, I think it's not so much that one is better than another. It's really comes down to what the facility decides to do in terms of certification. But a company can certainly change between standards if it's required. So this may be driven by customer expectations or by the industry that you're manufacturing in. So certainly standards are more commonly used, or certain standards are more commonly used in different regions globally, and this can also be a factor. So something like SQF is very prominent in North America, whereas BRC has a much bigger presence globally. And so this may be a driving factor as to why you may look at switching between standards. Although in reality, GFSI standards are benchmarked and should be viewed as equal. But when GFSI first came out, FSSC seemed to be a much better fit for well-established food programs, as it was certainly more open to interpretation. And this provided a bit more wiggle room for companies without having to implement massive changes. So I think as the food safety landscape has evolved, there may be a sort of a shift in what standards are required for manufacturers. But another reason why companies may end up switching is certainly due to mergers and acquisitions. So for example, if a facility is purchased by another manufacturing company, there may be a want to keep all facilities audited against the same standard. And so this would require a change, resulting in certification under a new standard rather than continuing with the old one.
Okay. So, but if I am, just new into this and finally decided, okay, this is the standard, finally got that done. So I'm ready to go to work. But is there anything else I need to do before I start working toward this standard?
Sure. So the first thing that you should do, the first and foremost priority is ensuring that you are compliant with the regulation that exists in your country of manufacture. So in the US, this certainly means being compliant with either FSMA or the USDA, depending on which regulation you fall under. In Canada, this would mean being compliant with the Safe Foods for Canadians regulation. While GFSI certainly outlines a benchmark globally, there is an expectation in all of the standards to ensure regulatory compliance is met in the country where your products are manufactured. In addition to making sure that the countries where you export your products to, the regulatory compliance is being met for those as well.
So say I'm in the US and I've determined I'm fully in compliant with FSMA. So does that mean it's going to be really easy for me to get GFSI? Because, I've got all this already. So it should just be a walk in the park to get there, right?
No, unfortunately, it's not that simple.
Okay.
So compliance with FSMA does not necessarily guarantee that you'll be compliant with the standard you've selected. So these standards typically go above and beyond what is required by regulation, and there certainly may be clauses within the standard that aren't necessarily required by regulation, but are required to be GFSI compliant.
Okay, then if I take it the other way around, if I'm certified to a GFSI standard, can I kind of assume I'm fully in compliance with FSMA?
If only it were that easy. No, unfortunately not. There are specific nuances to regulation that need to be met and aren't always required by GFSI. So one does not necessarily guarantee the other, and both unfortunately have to be met. So a good example of this is something like food defense. So the requirements set by the FDA for food defense differ than the expectations that are set with GFSI. So the FDA has a very specific format that's supposed to be followed for your food defense plan, whereas GFSI is a little bit more broad in how you approach it, provided that a plan has been developed to tackle the concept of food defense.
Okay. So I've gone all this now. I've looked and I'm compliant with my regulations and I've chosen my standard and double checked all of that. So now I'm ready to implement, right? How do I get started?
Yeah, so this is a big step for any company or business
Okay.
when they decide that they're going to enter into the GFSI world. So certainly once you've decided on a standard to implement, the work begins, and there is certainly a lot of it. So I would recommend usually by starting with a gap assessment. So take the standard that you've selected, go through clause by clause, look at all of the nitty-gritty details, document where your facility is compliant and where there are gaps that need to be closed. And don't assume that just because, our company has a shipping and receiving program or an environmental monitoring program that it's automatically compliant. Read the details, read that fine print, read the guidance documents that are there to support and help you, and ensure that the program being implemented is what the standard is expecting. Because this, at the end of the day, is what's going to be audited against during your certification audit.
That does sound like a lot of work and rather complex.
It's a ton of work to get to the GFSI level, and certainly having the time and resources to implement a GFSI scheme are important. And this is certainly an area where it can be helpful to bring in external eyes. A lot of the time when we work with our programs day in and day out, it becomes really hard to see the gaps in the areas that need improvement. We almost become a little bit blind to them. And so bringing in an expert in GFSI implementation can certainly be very helpful, as they tend to understand the audit requirements, the standard specific nuances, and they can help by ensuring those elements are incorporated and implemented prior to audit. So TAG certainly has experts who understand GFSI and the implementation product process, and we can help by completing gap assessments, managing development and implementation of programs, and helping to ensure compliance by completing a pre-assessment prior to scheduling a certification audit.
Okay, so I totally get what you mean about being blind to things. I know, I keep my bags for the grocery store right at the door. I'm driving down the road and I realize my bags are still at the door because
Yep.
I didn't see them because they're always there. So I totally get that, and where the external eyes can be very helpful. But what do you mean by this pre-assessment audit? What exactly is that? What does TAG do?
Sure. So a pre-assessment audit would happen prior to the actual certification audit. And again, one of our GFSI auditors would come to the facility and would basically complete a full mock or pre-assessment audit. And so this is completed to point out where any non-conformances to the standard may exist. And it allows for a company to continue to build, develop, modify their current programming prior to actually having the certifying body on site. So it also allows for a young or an inexperienced company to actually go through the motions of an audit, to understand the flow, what the requirements are, and the expectations for audit day. So while it's not necessarily for certification, this audit could certainly be used as a part of your internal audit, and helping to meet this clause, which is required by all GFSI standards. So it's really just a good exercise in sort of training and preparing for what that certification audit is going to look like. The other option that is available to certify or to companies that are looking to get certified is to actually schedule your audit. And you can walk through a certifying audit. And if it's not going well, or it doesn't look like, you're going to pass the audit, then there is the option to do a pre-assessment and switch to that as an option rather than continuing with certification. So again, this option allows for feedback to be provided from the auditor, and then changes can be made before another attempt at certification is scheduled.
Okay. So just with all this that we've kind of discussed, it really does seem that being certified to a GFSI standard, or at least going through that process of the assessment, can even just really help my food safety management program and see where the gaps are. So whether or not it's required by, one of my customers, or maybe I want to later expand my customer base, it could be good to have that. Um, it seems like, though, there's a lot of steps to take in the implementation and ensuring that I'm ready for that audit. So it's really nice to know that TAG can help with that. Is there anything else that you would see as important for a facility that is just getting ready to undertake or wanting to undertake GFSI certification that they need to understand? Kind of a wrap up to what we've discussed.
Of course. So just to go back on something that you mentioned previously there around, why somebody might look at the certification anyways, is because it really does provide a good framework for building your quality management system off of. And so that's another benefit to taking this GFSI journey. But that is important to remember that that's exactly what GFSI is. It's a journey, and it takes time to fully implement an audit ready system. And so once a gap assessment is complete, certainly review your identified gaps, determine how long it's going to take to fix those gaps. Is it going to be something that we can fix in 2 days, or is it something that's going to need 2 months of time to implement? Keeping in mind, most schemes will expect there to be somewhere between 3 and 6 months of records to pull from for the audit. So make sure you're asking yourself things like, is this something that we can have ready? Is this something that we need to work towards? Because this may ultimately dictate the timing that you can look at reasonably completing a certification audit. Also keep in mind when you're looking at scheduling that most certifying bodies are scheduling a minimum of 3 to 6 months out from the date of when you actually request that audit. So this should certainly be considered and built into the plan for certification. So if a facility knows they have downtimes or find that vacation time in the summer, for instance, makes it hard to staff, really avoid booking the audit in the summer and plan to sort of schedule for a time frame that works best for you.
Want to keep up to date on the latest trends, topics, and tips on food safety? Click subscribe now. Thank you so much, Kate, for sharing your expertise on GFSI and even just providing some great tips on how to undertake this journey. And I'd also like to note to our audience that certification audit, that first one, is not a one and done. Unfortunately, once you're certified, you will still need to undergo successive audits, generally about every 12 months. And preparing for that audit can be different than preparing for the first. So I would like to invite Kate to join us again to further discuss this and talk about, now that someone is certified to a GFSI standard, how to become ready for the next audit.
Thank you, Lisa.
So to our audience, to be sure you don't miss that episode upcoming or any other, be sure to like, follow, or subscribe to Tag Talks Food Safety on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Thank you.